This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz. Very excited to be speaking with François Audouy about A Complete Unknown. How are you, François?
Great. I'm really happy to be here.
This film seems like a pretty massive undertaking. Can you tell me about your relationship growing up with Bob Dylan and this whole music generation?
Well, he was another generation before me, my father's generation probably, but while he was on my radar, of course, just like everybody, I wasn't really I wouldn't call myself a huge Bob Dylan fan. Although I remember my father had some Bob Dylan records that, occasionally would end up on the record player and stuff. But what happens on a project like this is that uh, you live with these characters and you live with this world every day for years, and you can't help but become a fan, I guess. And because you're hired to be believers, we're all believers in the material, and we all are we all become scholars, I think, in the subject matter that we're creating. So I really fell in love with not only this period, but with these characters that inhabited it, because they're so rich and um, so fascinating to discover. And they're like an onion peel, where the more you peel back, the more layers there are. It's so interesting, and you learn a lot. The greatest thing about my job is I get to keep learning, and it's like taking a graduate course in a subject matter every movie. This was something that I lived with for over 3 years, probably 4 years. And that amount of research and reading and scouting to these locations and everything, um, you become completely obsessive about the material, and you can't help but love it, really.
I'm curious about that obsessive part and how much, your attention to detail and making sure that things look like they really looked like, or whether there's an effort to make it look good for the screen, because I know those two things don't always go hand in hand.
Well, yeah, I mean, the job isn't creating like a live action documentary, where sometimes these real locations aren't very cinematic, or aren't very photographable in the way that you would shoot a scene. Um, for example, like the Newport Festival stage was actually not very conducive to shooting all these scenes. It was flat and uninteresting without any layering to the wings, and if we had just literally created that stage, it would be a yawn. It would be a snooze, you know. What we did though is we recreated the spirit of the stage, and we augmented it in such a way that still felt authentic to the idea of the stage, all hand built and handmade out of wood with canvas wings and everything. But we'll move things around and add layering and depth, midground, background, to make it um, compositionally interesting to look at. Um, the same thing is for with McDougal Street in particular in the Village. We're not we're not like rebuilding the exact same uh, street that existed, or in 1961. And even if we had an infinite budget, the characters would have to spend an extra 45 minutes of the movie walking between all of these places. So um, we found a location in Jersey City that had the right bones architecturally, and then we were able to we mapped out the whole village, and then compared it to our two blocks that we had control of, and created sort of a hybrid village that felt plausible in the positioning and placement of all of these clubs and restaurants and bars and things that we wanted to represent there. We so we rebuilt like the Gaslight Cafe exterior, which was a step down. Cafe Wa, the Kettle of Fish was an interior and exterior location. Cafe Bazaar, Cafe Figaro was an interior exterior location. And at the heart of this was a place called the Folk Life Center, which was really the heart of McDougal Street for everything folk. It was like, if you're into folk, that's Mecca. It's where you go on a pilgrimage and you just drink in uh, the instruments and the sheet music and the records. It was all sort of assembled in this hub, which is, of course, our character does in the second scene of the movie, makes a beeline right to the heart of the folk community. So that was really, I mean, it was really exciting and challenging to try to recreate this, not only this moment in time, but this very specific geographical location in Manhattan, which was a community of artists and poets and sculptors and free thinkers and young people, that was so unique to the time, you know. And because I had such a long runway on this project, I got to dig deeper than what you would normally do in like a 4 month prep, because I had, over the years, first you get every book known to man, you do all the into internet searching, you put that, you scan it, you put folders together, but then after several months, you start to kind of, or at least what happened to me is I started to transcend the the literal images, and I started to try to think about what it must have been like to walk those streets where you've got, where you could bump into Jack Kerouac or Allen Ginsberg or Dylan Thomas or whatever. They're all these amazing Mount Rushmore figures of the 1960s. They were all living there. Um, and they're all, I think, being inspired by the place and each other. And it was creating like a cultural hub of significance that was similar to things that were happening on the West Coast as well, in the Bay Area and in Laurel Canyon in LA and stuff. And it's like, I imagined it being like a kind of a cultural petri dish, that's like you're witnessing it, the beginning of something's happening, something significant is happening. And it turns out that what you're witnessing is really, you're witnessing like the nuclear core of social change, of of musical change that's creating what we think of as the 1960s, and that was an incredibly exciting idea to try to tap into.
I also, having lived in New York City for, 12 years and briefly on Thompson Street and going to NYU, it's always fun to see New York City recreated. And I like the attention to detail you did, even if, again, you did it somewhere else, that the idea that you wanted it to be like that and to be representative, I think that's very cool, because it never feels like it could really, I can't really imagine what it was like, but to get to see it that way and think that
Yeah.
is
Well, Jim,
pretty cool.
Jim also is very, very good at making spaces feel real in his attention to detail when it comes to what we call background, which are the extras that come in. If you watch this movie, one thing that I think that is incredible is that the extras don't feel like extras. And the reason they don't feel like extras is they all have backstories and uh, purpose. And that's particularly true of the street scenes, where there's a whole, when Jim would tell stories about the 1970s in New York and walking down the street and how it smelled, and how and the characters and the people that inhabited the streets, the pickle vendor on the corner who would sell pickles out of a barrel, and the street, the buskers, who were with their hat, and what that felt like. And so, on some projects, the extras come in and they just come in and they're just like, they just populate randomly the street. With this, we really wanted to create story and backstory and give everybody in those scenes, they all had a reason for being there. And that's, I think, also made it feel very real.
I know that James Mangold has worked with a lot of people, dating back to Walk the Line and beforehand. You've had a few collaborations that all feel, I mean, Wolverine and Logan, obviously, those two would be somewhat similar, but Ford versus Ferrari and then this feel like very different kinds of projects. But what kind of shorthand have you established with him?
Well, yeah, on Ford versus Ferrari, that's interesting because it was also a 1960s based movie, but it was another aspect of the 1960s, another facet of the 1960s. But it helped having had already done a 1960s film with the same director, with Jim. It really helped a lot. and now, I've worked on like 6 projects with Jim, 4 films that have been produced. And so we do have a shorthand, but on this movie in particular, it really felt like we were making a movie amongst friends. He brought back a lot of longtime collaborators like Ariane Phillips and costume designer, and Faden Papa Michael as DP, who we've all worked together. I worked together with him on Ford versus Ferrari and a couple other projects. So there's like he really like created this environment that broke away from this siloed approach where we felt like we were just our responsibility was just like on one thing, and a real collaborative experience. And I mean, it was really fun. I mean, it was just really, really fun because like I would be sharing research back and forth with Ariane Phillips, who I shared a wall with. Her office was on the other side of the wall. Um, and we'd all get excited, when we'd get it. I'd get an email from Bob Dylan's manager with links to the original negatives scanned from Ted Russell, who's a photojournalist, that he shot in Bob's apartment. That 85% of these photos had never been published before. No one had ever seen them before. Or the we had hundreds and hundreds of photos from Don Hunstein, who shot lots of photos inside Studio A, Columbia Studio A. And so those became very, very useful artifacts for our work in like creating an authentic reproduction of this world.
When I think about this film, I think about some of the more complex sets, like the one you talked about, and also one of the first ones we see, which is Woody's very bare hospital room.
Yeah.
What kind of intention goes into that to making sure that that feels like a lived-in place, even though it's supposed to be pretty isolated and desolate?
Well, we scouted a lot of it was always going to be a location set. We scouted a lot, many, many different locations for that, and we ended up at a sort of a semi-abandoned school in Newark. And we built out that entire room as a set, sort of built into the location. Um, we looked, Jim had already done a period movie in a psychiatric hospital. So he had a familiarity with that form language of the rounded corners and the institutional tile and that kind of stuff that he was really sensitive to. But it started with lots and lots of research. Um, I wasn't for that set. It felt into the category of not trying to be completely of not copying the actual Greystone Hospital, which was in reality it was a Victorian, like it looked like a Victorian mansion. Um, but I created sort of a hybrid of the various institutional sort of hospitals in New York and New Jersey at the time for that. Um, and a lot of that was in the materials and the colors and the sort of starkness and unadorned quality of the hallways and the rooms that felt sort of uh, well, they were literally empty, but they felt empty at the same time. It fell in the category of creating an emotional sort of response for these cold and sort of echoey um, interiors.
What's next for you? I don't know if you have projects that are going to take quite as long as this one to make, but I'm curious what you're working on.
Oh well, I'm working on Euphoria season 3. We start shooting in like 4 weeks, so I'm working on that right now, and that's going to be a very exciting and different thing that I've ever done before, and that's all in LA. It's very exciting. And then we just finished another limited series for Netflix called The Residence, which is a murder mystery set in the White House. That was also done here in LA.
I assume that required a good amount of research.
Oh my God. Well, we built we'll hopefully talk more about that when it comes out in March, but
Yeah.
it was the biggest White House build ever done in Hollywood. We built pretty much the entire executive mansion. So it was also a very long, research-driven, obsessive project. So maybe that's my thing.
Yeah, well, I will definitely keep an eye out for that one. I'd love to chat about that. But before I let you go, I'm curious, this is Awards Buzz. what films have you seen recently where the production design is really sticking out for you?
Uh, I've watched a lot of movies. I have to say I've watched a lot of movies. I just saw Gladiator, and I thought that the Arthur Max's work on that was really impressive. Thought that was great. Um, I still have to watch. I watched Blitz, and I thought that was great. And I haven't seen Wicked yet, or Nosferatu. I hear those movies are really good looking. Um, I thought the work on Saturday Night was really compelling, and that looked really great as a recreation of the of the NBC building. No, it's been a great year for design. I mean, it's been a really great year for design. I think it's been. I thought Dune Part Two looked great, amazing. And I mean, overall, I think the quality of production design, like in this decade, has been really exciting, and it's the scope and quality of just the craftsmanship of all these films are just been really a next level. I mean, everybody is working. All my peers are working at such a high level now that it's lifting us all up uh, with that inspiration and sort of the high degree of quality that everyone's doing.
I really appreciate that optimistic perspective, and I thank you so much for talking to me today. And hopefully, we'll talk about the White House soon.
Okay, looking forward to it.